Hello, everyone. We're thrilled that you're joining us here today. It's a very special event. We're commemorating Asian Pacific American Heritage Month we're being joined. It's a very special event for us here at the New York Film Academy by producer Janet Yang. So by means of introduction, before Janet comes on, she is here. I'm going to give you some biographical details about Janet. And she has also, and her assistant, Jessica, who we're very grateful for, has supplied a little bit of a reel, some clips from Janet's projects, etc. And then Janet will join us and we will have a bit of a chat. So Janet is a Golden Globe and Emmy Award-winning Hollywood producer. Janet sits on the board of governors of the Motion Picture Academy and is chair of its membership and governance committee. Janet came to prominence through her collaboration with Steven Spielberg on Empire of the Sun. And that was followed by a long partnership with multiple Academy Award winning director Oliver Stone, which is how I got to know Janet, where she served as executive producer on the iconic The Joy Luck Club, and as producer on the Golden Globe winning The People vs. Larry Flint. Among Janet's many other credits are the Sundance Award winning Dark Matter with Meryl Streep, The Weight of Water, directed by Academy Award winner Kathryn Bigelow, Fox's High Crimes with Morgan Freeman, a Chinese adaptation of the Disney franchise High School Musical, cult favorites Zero Effect by Jake Kasdan, and Shanghai Calling with the China Film Group, and most recently, the animated feature Over the Moon for Netflix, which was nominated for Best Animated Feature. Janet's been named one of the 50 most powerful women in Hollywood by The Hollywood Reporter. Janet began her career by running the first distribution company to market Chinese films into North America. She also brokered the reintroduction of American studio films to the Chinese marketplace after a decades-long hiatus. Committed to fostering global understanding, Janet's been a long-standing member of the Committee of 100, an organization of the most prominent Chinese Americans, an advisory board member of the Asian Society Southern California, where she also chairs its highly regarded US-Asia Entertainment Summit, and is co-founder of Gold House, the nonprofit collective of the most influential Asian cultural leaders. Janet is fluent in Mandarin. She holds a bachelor's from Brown University, an MBA from Columbia University, and was also serves as presidential fellow at Loyola Marymount University. So let's take a look at this reel, get to see some visual representations from Janet's career.
Named one of the most 50 powerful women in Hollywood, Janet Yang is a force to be reckoned with. For over 2 decades, she's worked with top directors like Steven Spielberg, produced critically acclaimed films like The Joy Luck Club.
I've had the opportunity to work in China for 3 decades. It was a really unlikely journey, and I am constantly remarking to myself these days when everybody knows that China is big and it's growing and there's money to be made, I decided I was going to start bringing films over, and I started working with the China Film Corporation. It was the single entity at the time that did all the importing of films, exporting films, distribution, domestic distribution. It was a huge mammoth organization that did everything. And we started bringing Chinese films around to different film festivals. And then I weirdly had this opportunity to do the reverse, to bring American films to China. Then I got tapped on the shoulder by none other than Steven Spielberg. And that leads me to probably the most incredible experience I've had working on a film anywhere. It was 1986. There was Steven, there we were, 5,000 extras in period costume, and I somehow had to help figure out how this was all going to work.
China was much more centralized then, so we had to get all the permissions all the way to the top of the government.
Self-proclaimed cultural ambassador, what began as a dream to bridge Hollywood and China, East and West, today is a reality. What has changed between China and Hollywood in this 25 years?
What hasn't it? And that actually gave a huge boost to the Chinese film industry. And so suddenly people started thinking, oh, let's make films in China.
Including the balance of power, says Yang. Experts say China, the world's fastest growing film market, will soon be the world's largest movie market.
It's kind of cool. The greatest thing about this, trying to learn this language, is how it just really forces you to have another whole perspective on the world.
不到不读不到笔，不知不到到读不到笔。
I've been in many situations where I was the only woman in the room. I've also been in situations where I was the only Asian. I've just been very lucky, I think, because I came with a little bit of a different sense of purpose, maybe, knowing that China was kind of a touchstone for me, and I wasn't trying to not be Chinese American.
79th Street. Take me to this address, please.
要到的这个地方。
Just take me to the address.
到了。
Thank you.
Because Hollywood has dominated this industry for so long, it's an opportunity for China to be more in the public eye and to shape the image of Chinese and Asians in general, and really sort of tilt an axis in another. I believe very much in the power of movies because it strikes people at a very subconscious psychological level, and I for one am very much looking forward to both participating and being an observer of what's to come.
So I'm very happy to welcome Janet Yang to the New York Film Academy. Hi, Janet.
Hi, Neil. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. I have to make two comments right off the bat. Forgive me. This reel was made about 3 or 4 years ago, and so much has changed. I would not be emphasizing China today. And in fact, for the last several years, I have not worked in China. Relations between the US and China have deteriorated to such a degree that it's very uncomfortable. The second thing is, like Tom Cruise, I'm thinking of giving my Golden Globe back to Hollywood Foreign Press Association. So anyway, I'm semi-joking about the second part, but this reel was clearly created to emphasize the work I've done with China, and that has become such a minimal part of my life recently, out of necessity, not out of desire. So I can talk about a lot of other things, but China is not front and center at the moment.
Okay, we appreciate that. And respect
It's
that.
just really interesting. I was shocked myself as I was watching. I was like, wow, there was a time where this is what people really wanted to know about. And there was so much hunger about China. And now there's so little appetite for it.
Right. And it speaks to the kind of fluid geopolitical, world that we live in.
Yes.
Things can change so rapidly.
So rapidly.
And hopefully, the pendulum will swing back at a certain point to more positive.
Maybe.
We hope. We hope, and then you'll be, well situated.
Be patient. Fortunately, I'm not sitting around twiddling my thumbs in the meantime. But yeah, that's been an interesting part of my life, and that comes and goes with its relevance is sometimes very strong and sometimes not at all.
So we have a mixed group of attendees here today from the New York Film Academy. And so these are students. We have producing students, we have filmmakers, screenwriters, cinematographers, documentary. And I think, a common thread for many film students, everyone is curious, how do we get started? How does one get started in this business? I'd be curious. Was film always kind of part of your consciousness? Was it something that was in the back of your head, and somehow, how did that come about?
I was a film lover, but it never occurred to me in a million years that I would actually be able to work in the industry. I grew up in New York, namesake of your Film Academy, and first of all, Hollywood just seemed so far away, but also being Asian, having never seen any Asians on screen, large or small, or if I did, in the most obnoxious roles, it was just, it seemed so far-fetched. So it was such a bizarre set of circumstances that led me to where I am today, and not one that I planned at all. In fact, I would say my whole life has not been planned. But what I would say to the aspiring young filmmakers, that sometimes you find that distinctive advantage, where you find some kind of crack in in the landscape that allows you to get through. And in my case, it happened to be China. I don't think anybody should replicate exactly what I did, but it really did create an opening that almost didn't exist. I was following really curiosity and a passion than a career path. So when I went to live in China after college, simply because I was just very, very interested, and I saw films and television shows with Asian characters of all different kinds, obviously, it just inspired me. It woke something up in me that I had never thought about before, which is that, oh, we can do this. Like, we're allowed to be on camera. And then when I got to work with Steven Spielberg and saw how a film was made behind the scenes, you know, especially one of that scale, I was like, oh, this is a great place to be, because you have control over the images on the screen and the words being said. And it just awakened a part of me that I didn't even know existed. And so I definitely went for it. But for most people, it's no longer a discovery that all people of color, or you know, or from any background, now deserves a place on screen and deserves to have our stories told authentically. But for me, it was a big wake-up call, given how I grew up and the changing times. You know, it's shocking to think about that. And I do feel encouraged about a lot of the changes that have happened recently, despite all the tragedies too, that authentic stories can be told and are welcomed. And this was so not the case when I was growing up. So it had to be this process of self-discovery for myself that that allowed me to dream to do this. You know, it was not a path that seemed preordained in any sense of the word.
So, but I'm still a little fixated on your very kind of origin coming into the industry, because you have an MBA, so you have a business background.
Yes.
Was living in China, so you obviously saw that opportunity from a business slash distribution point of view.
Yes, well, it allowed that degree, which, you know, I don't know what it's really worth in the end, but it was a piece of paper. So I went to live in China after college. I was there in 81. And I just had the most incredible experience, because I witnessed this country in incredible transition coming out of the Cultural Revolution. And again, I had my major inspiration, which really just led me to want to show more Chinese films to the West, because all I could think at that time was like, oh, if people saw these films, they would see us differently. You know, I couldn't find that rich array of characters and storytelling in the West. I had to go to China, and I was like, oh, let people see these films, and then they'll see us differently. But I didn't quite know how to do that. So I thought, oh, I should probably go get some legitimate credential. Like, again, going to live in China was not a direct path to any career success that anybody had outlined. It's such a wayward thing to do at the time. But then I got this degree, and it helped me. And while I was in business school at Columbia, I organized these film festivals. I would carry these 35mm prints that I picked up from the Consulate General in New York on 12th Avenue and 42nd Street, carry these prints, and I would organize these festivals. And there was a lot of curiosity, because, you know, there's always some great cineasts out there who want to discover new cinema. And then I discovered there was a company in San Francisco that wanted to actually distribute these films and had a theater. So that piece of paper, that MBA, allowed them to have confidence that I could run this company. And that was my first migration west to San Francisco, where we had a loose chain of theaters in other cities across North America. And I was so happy doing that job. I was in touch with a lot of festival directors. That's where I first met Jeff Gilmore, who's running Pacific Film Art. No, he was running UCLA Film Archives, and Tom Luddy, Pacific Film Archives, and Richard Pena was running Chicago Art, et cetera, et cetera. So I was happily doing that. And then I got a call from this executive at Universal who wanted to sell American films to China. So then I moved to LA, and I started doing that. We had retrospectives of like Gregory Peck's works, and I was still flying back and forth to China. And then when I was there at the Universal lot, that's when I got the call from Kathy Kennedy. about helping out on the movie Empire of the Sun.
So, so that obviously your experience with Spielberg on that movie and with Kathleen Kennedy and all the producers involved um, opened your consciousness to the world of producing and actually
Yes.
making the project. So, what were you doing? What did you have a job title on that movie?
I was, I was just, I was just, I was a production. I basically, the shoot in Shanghai was only about 3 weeks, but it was massive. All those giant exterior scenes were done in Shanghai. So I was helping on the pre-production side for a good 6, 8, 9 months, maybe
Wow.
in Shanghai, setting up and helping get permits and working with the crews on both sides and, really trying to stitch together the whole thing, which was a very pioneering effort. Ironically, while we were in Shanghai, Bernardo Bertolucci was in Beijing prepping Last Emperor. So these are two giant filmmakers working in China in the 80s, and it was a very promising time until it all came to a crash in 1989. But yeah, so I was a production advisor. I was working with the China unit. I was not a producer per se, but it gave me incredible access. I mean,
Sure.
when Stephen arrived in Shanghai, she's like, "Do not leave his side." Like I was glued to him and rode with him to and from set every day. Because she wanted someone that could speak Chinese, that could be his eyes and ears, and have direct communication with the Chinese side. So it was such a blessing in so many ways to have that opportunity to work with, what did I know? I was new, but I could be helpful because of my China experience.
Right. And what a great way to learn all the
Yeah.
nuts and bolts of production by being on the front line and doing it all.
Yeah.
That's exciting. So I think, hearing what you said kind of at the outset in terms of the way the climate has changed a bit, in terms of China's position and U.S. Chinese relations, et cetera. Do you, I assume that you're kind of encouraged. We look at Asian representation. Well, before we go there, I mean, in terms of that, we're not going to dwell on that kind of relationship, but what do you feel in terms of like co-productions these days, or even if is it beyond mainland China, American producers looking
Yeah,
beyond?
well, we all have to be so flexible. So I think it is relevant to say, so the 80s, very promising, so many filmmakers thinking, oh, maybe there's a project in China, and then relations really soured in 1989. And then so for the next, and then that was the year actually I joined Oliver as his partner in a company we created called Ixlin. And I made a very conscious decision. I was like, I can't put all my eggs in the China basket. I better learn how to really be a producer for many things. And so that was the beginning of a whole other period where I was very much planted in Hollywood and making a lot of other movies. And Oliver, it was a very, very robust time for our company. Oliver was making a film a year. I was producing a film a year. And that was like very much when the studios dominated. So I was very much, again, as a Hollywood producer and having little to do with China. I mean, Drollet Club was made during that period, but it was partially shot in China, but pretty much I was based here. And it wasn't until like 10, 15 years later when things started really warming up around the time of Beijing Olympics. And after that, the box office was really growing. And I was invited back. It was actually weirdly, it was after the 9/11 and America's very depressed. I went back and I thought, oh, China's really changing. And so it started ramping up again. And I started becoming much more involved. And I made 2 movies back to back there, actually 3. One was for Disney, the Chinese version of High School Musical. One was an indie movie called Shanghai Calling. And we shot part of another indie movie, Dark Matter, the one with Meryl Streep. And so my wheels started turning again, like, oh, maybe there's stuff to do in China. And then as all this is ramping up and, because of political issues on both sides of the Pacific, things just came to a crashing halt again. So we have to be very flexible as producers. You just constantly, as much as I don't want to embrace politics in my work, I have to be aware of what's going on in the environment because we've seen such radical change. So we're back now at a place where, fortunately, there's a lot going on in Hollywood that I can do, and the Asian American community has really risen up in a big way, and I've been very, very active in that. And all my projects right now, or at least the majority of them, do have some component of underrepresented voices. And so it's with the streamers and with social media, the business model has really changed, and also the rise of television. It's given people like myself who want to focus not on just like your classic studio mainstream, tentpole movie. It's given us a lot of opportunities that were unforeseen even 5, 10 years ago.
Right. I was just doing some research earlier, and it's a bit of an old statistic, but I think it shows. I mean, it makes a point, but I think it also, in terms of where the industry has been, but also hopefully, in terms of the incremental change that's been going on. But I came across the statistics where Asian Americans are this was like back in 2014, but Asian American population, in terms of the general population, was 5.4% of the population, but only 1.4% of lead characters
Yeah,
in studio films. So,
very, very
that's
typical
that's
statistics.
a miserable statistic.
Yeah,
But
that's,
obviously, I think from what you're saying is you're feeling encouraged by everything
well,
from Crazy Rich Asians to
yeah.
The
I mean,
Farewell to Minari.
yes. And by the way, I want to address the question you started asking, but I'll talk about this first. You asked about co-production, and somebody asked a question about that, so I didn't want to ignore that.
Sure.
But for me, a lot happened about 5 years ago at the 2016 Oscars. If you remember, that was the Oscars So White year, meaning that meme
Sure.
came out, and a lot of data had been collected about the membership. And weirdly, we were excited because we thought it was the year of racial sensitivity. And then Chris Rock came out and made this, what we consider very, very hurtful, horrible joke about Asians, and little kids came out in briefcases. So a group of us got together very spontaneously. There was also the Sacha Baron Cohen said something about little yellow people with tiny dongs. It was just like, we were so mortified, so upset. So a group of us very spontaneously got together, and then we ended up having a meeting with the Academy CEO, Dawn, and she was very, very receptive. And they were just in the process of creating this new initiative to diversify the membership. And so I got very involved with that. And then one thing led to another, and I became a governor. And then one thing led to another, and I was elected to chair the membership and governance committee. And I feel I have to say that just change is possible, because in these past few years, we've seen how the diversification of membership has really changed the Oscar, the optics. Like look at how the nominations went, and nominations and wins went this year, and that's a drastic departure of years past. So I've been so grateful to the Academy's senior leadership for being so committed to becoming more inclusive, and the results, do bear out. And so I think it's an encouragement to the whole industry that this is really possible. But in answer to going back to co-productions, because you asked it, and this person who is in the chat, who I can tell from the spelling of his or her name, is, I believe, from Taiwan. I can tell.
Correct.
It
And
seems.
he's a producing student.
Producing. Okay. So I think there was a time where that China co-production model seemed so promising, and many people attempted. I did one, actually almost two. One such production was a movie called Shanghai Calling. It's this romantic comedy, and that was an official co-production because we did get financing from China, and it was distributed in China as a Chinese film. That's the advantage, and that you get to play during holidays and get a bigger share of the box office. So many people were gunning for that model, because if you're an imported film, you can't play during holidays and you get a lower share of the box office. But I think these days the bigger problem is really finding content that is appealing to both China and the West. So I'm just talking about Chinese co-productions now. We can talk about others. And for those who are tracking the Chinese box office, they are making hit after hit after hit. And they're, movies like a simple romantic comedy one came out recently called Mom or something. It was like made, I think, $600 million. And these are movies that often don't cost a lot of money. There's some movies that are bigger, but they are able to really satisfy their audience very well with very, very specific China based stories, or in some cases more extravagant, what we might consider like visual effects driven stories. However, those films do not generally have much of a market outside of Asia. They might travel to other Asian countries, but not to the West. So there's things are kind of moving apart. Western movies still play in China, but they often don't play nearly as they used to dominate the box office. And now the Chinese are making so many commercial hits for themselves that they're not as reliant on Western movies. So this idea of finding the examples, the larger case examples of movies that were co-productions. One was The Great Wall, which did not play particularly well in China or the West. And recently, I don't know if Mulan was officially co-production, but I know it was intended to be initially. They thought, oh, here's a Chinese subject matter that the Chinese should love. And they cast a very popular Chinese actress, Liu Yifei. It just, there were all sorts of issues with that, which you've probably heard about. I don't know if I want to repeat them, but there are some issues with social media and then the end credits. And, there are a lot of people that protest. So it's very gnarly and very tricky now, just on a pure, not to mention even the politics of it, but just on a creative level to find the projects, because the Chinese tastes are becoming more and more specific and Western tastes are less and less friendly toward Chinese content. I'm happy that Over the Moon, which began as a potential Chinese co-production because it was a story that I pitched to Oriental DreamWorks, which was a joint venture that Jeffrey Katzenberg created in Shanghai between DreamWorks and Chinese partners. And then when Comcast spun off DreamWorks, this part of DreamWorks, Oriental DreamWorks, then the Chinese partners came in and became a wholly owned Chinese company, but then Netflix took over the production. So, but it was intended as that. And the whole, principle behind Oriental DreamWorks initially was to find Chinese content that would have international appeal. And it was a great idea seemingly at the time, but one that no longer seems quite as viable.
And so that film was made completely in China?
It was not completely, no. You can probably tell which parts were made in China with beautiful animation in the sort of first and third acts, the parts set in China, but the fantasy sequences were not done in China. But the company, originally Oriental DreamWorks, which then became Pearl Studios, was the originator of the project. And so without that company, again, which intended to make international projects with Chinese content, without that company, that project would have never come to light.
I'm just curious. I know it's a mundane question, but it's always fascinating. I think for producing students, especially, how long did that project take to come to fruition?
Well, I
Sounds like
was invited. Yeah, no problem. I was invited, and this was my first animated project, so it was a big eye opener for me. I was invited to go to Shanghai to be part of a brain trust by Pearls, but then it was Oriental DreamWorks in the November of 2015.
Okay.
A year later, we had a script.
Okay.
The following year, so in 2017, we had a director in Glenn Keane. And when they said we're going to work at lightning speed, I was like, I mean, 2018? They're like, are you kidding? I was like, 2019? No. So it was it took 3 years, and that was very fast, 2020.
Right. It sounds fast. For
animation. Yeah,
for sure.
It was pretty fast. So it was a 5-year journey, and I gather a fast one at that. And it was because a lot of things fell into place, finding the perfect director for it, first getting the great script from Audrey Wells, AAPI, and then Glenn, and then Netflix, because Melissa Cobb was actually originally working at Oriental DreamWorks, and then she went over to Netflix. So she was already familiar with the project. So that path was pretty smooth. Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of, I just want to go back to the co-production thing for a moment. I mean, as producers, we often, as you've expressed, and we need to be able to pivot, right? Circumstances change, as you just attested to, and we need to pivot. New sources of finance crop up, and then everyone runs and takes advantage, and then it's all dried up, and we have to find the new one.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
do you find other areas of opportunity in or in Asia, or what are your thoughts
Um,
about that? Or
they're there, but I really feel like everything's moving toward the streamers. I mean, there was a period, as you mentioned in my intro, I was chairing something called the U.S. Asia Entertainment Summit, and we literally had all these incredible sponsors coming from China who desperately wanted to meet, and they did. I mean, so many deals were done in that period. If there was a period of, I don't know, 3 years maybe, if you went to the movies, you would inevitably see Chinese credits because they were bringing so much cash. They would fund whole slates. Several studios had China cash backing their slates. Not to mention they bought Legendary and bought AMC. That's, one company, Wanda, Wang Jianli's company. And then, Perfect World made a deal with Lionsgate and Universal, Warner. And there was so many deals being done, and a lot of interest in Chinese directors, et cetera. The Chinese cash came at a time where the studios were a little cash poor at the time. They're not as robust as they had been in the past. But I think what's happening now is really streamers are dominating, and there are a lot of, the streamers see the world differently. The studios grew up in a time where the American marketplace was the overwhelming share of the global market, and then that started shrinking as global markets became um, larger. But I think the streamers come in with a much different attitude. Like any pair of eyeballs anywhere in the world matters to them. And now that North America is more saturated, they're really looking to develop Asia and other countries, around the world. So they really want authentic stories. They really do. But their business model is different. They want to own everything up front. So there's actually less room. I've had Chinese investors say, "Can we get into Netflix?" Or, it's hard. They want to own everything, and so I would say that's where the future probably lies. And with the news today that Warner Media and Discovery are joining forces, everybody wants to be in your living room. So now it's a battle of the streamers.
I'm just curious. So how does one see Over the Moon in China?
Um, that's an excellent question. I mean, it was released theatrically,
Okay.
and chances are that there's a way to see. I'm not about to promote, a pirated version, but God, that's such an excellent question.
I'm just not really aware.
Yeah, no, I mean, Netflix is not official. I wonder if at some point it may be officially. It was shown theatrically, but it came out at a time where there was so many competing projects, because October 1st is National Day in China, and that's a big holiday, and everybody wants to release their films at that time. So all the big blockbusters in China released. So we got a little bit lost there. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing. It's like if you don't have the backing of the big distributors or the government or whatever, it is hard to be just to get the screen time. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna find.
I'm also really ignorant. I mean, I assume that there are Chinese streaming services that are.
There are. That's such a good question. I can't believe I didn't think of it myself sooner. But perhaps a Chinese streaming service has picked it up from Netflix. I hope so. I hope so. But if you've noticed, I have, and that's you exactly underscore my point that I was making earlier. A movie as popular as dating back to, say, Crouching Tiger. It was a movie made in Mandarin that people thought would play extremely well in China. It did not. It played extremely well in the rest of the world. Crazy Rich Asians, wildly popular, did not play well in China. Farewell, extremely lauded, did not play well in China. One cannot expect that a Chinese contented movie or show out in the outside of China is going to play well in China, because their tastes are so different, and they want things that are closer to, they just have a different way of looking at things. So you can't be casual about, oh, let's just throw in even movies that big blockbuster movies where they cast a Chinese actress, in a role. They thought that would open up the China market. No, the audiences are much more sophisticated than that. They want things that really, really speak to them at a deep level. And if you're doing that, you may lose the international perspective, right? So It's tough. It's tough right now.
Um, I'm just curious in terms of the current, climate here in the States. I know you're quite active. You're a bit of an activist, and you spoke about some of the original motivation for you to move into this industry in the first place was to further Asian representation. And as a young person, you didn't really see these faces that maybe you were growing up with, but they weren't on the screens. Um, what about, how are you feeling about the environment here in America today? Um, I mean, obviously, it's a big question. It's complicated,
Yeah.
but uh, obviously, the spate of hate crimes, the effect of COVID, et cetera, kind of coinciding with this kind of cultural incremental progress. It's it's kind of like an interesting mix.
Well, I would say it's the best of times and worst of times.
Well said.
And often it's setbacks that cause or help engender more activism. And I think that's, what the incident that I cited 5 years ago with what started as being a negative, was like, what? They had these horrible jokes against Asians. Well, I would not be involved with the Academy if I didn't have the opportunity to help in their efforts to diversify membership. I just became very active, and I'm so grateful that that happened, because it never occurred to me that I could be involved with the Academy at all. I was just getting my DVDs and voting, and that was the extent of it. So I would say the same thing about what's happening now. I mean, I think these hate crimes have been so plentiful and so prominent now that everybody can record them on their phones, and it's been so shocking, and it has just underscored something that many of us have known about, although the frequency of these incidents is definitely on the uptick. But we've known that there's been an anti-Asian sentiment that's been brewing for decades and decades for so many reasons, different wars, economic wars as well as military wars. It's like, so we've always felt, many of us have always felt othered to some degree, and depending on where you live or what era, there's always this, for a lot of Japanese Americans, the internment camps are not that long ago. There are so many scientists that are accused of being spies. I mean, it's just it just never goes away. It never completely goes away. It's just ongoing. And the latent or less obvious manifestations of them have now come fully into Technicolor. And it's just like, and it's been heartbreaking. It's been incredibly heartbreaking to see perfectly innocent victims, like elderly, walking down the street, walking back from a bus stop. I mean, it's just like, what? So why has this been going on? And I would say a couple of positive things have come of it. One is people are aware. The national media is finally waking up to this. It used to be maybe reported in different corners, but not in national media. We're now in the middle of Asian Pacific Heritage Month. But also it's I think created a real desire to create coalitions with other people of color who have also suffered. It's hate is hate, however you direct it. And so all of us who have been targets of hate, we come together and become a much more powerful force. And that's a real positive that I've seen. There's real solidarity on that front. So, and just so there's been, gosh, I have a list of half a dozen PSAs, 8 PSAs that have been created. One that I executive produced that John Chu directed, which is actually playing in every AMC theater, every one of its 7,500 screens throughout the month of May. And so many other wonderful PSAs that are coming out, and just, people are very committed, and we feel like it's a time, and we have to seize the moment, because we don't know when this moment will arise again.
Right. Those are words of great inspiration, I think, for our attendees who are content makers, and clearly, making film, making television, content for the internet, whatever, it's a powerful tool. that can have an effect and can change minds,
Right.
etc. If there are people attending here today, if they're,
Somebody
interested
asked
in
a question.
getting involved with any organizations to kind of,
Yeah. Okay.
spread
Somebody
that.
asked about how do we build connections and network, and there are a couple of great organizations. At my LMU class, I invited speakers from both. One of course is Sundance Institute, and Sundance. Like if you want to get your projects recognized, there's some wonderful people that help nurture you and your projects. Often to a great place, landing at the Sundance Film Festival. There's also another organization called Film Independent. Someone named Josh Welsh has been there forever, has done a great job in terms of creating workshops and networking events. Obviously, during the pandemic, things have been mostly online, but I expect that will change. And I do encourage, like any of you who are in school, you have already a built-in network, and your classmates are your network. You have to find your tribe. Nothing is done alone, and you want to connect with people and keep sharing information. And I'm sure there's tons of social media groups. And I mean, I happen to know of many that are specifically related to China based. There's a China Hollywood Society and all these different WeChat groups. There's also CAPE, for those of you who are Asian, Coalition of Asian Pacific Americans in Entertainment. But I believe there are many other such groups or organizations for people who are underrepresented. But for just general networking in the industry, I think through schools, through Film Independent, through Sundance, and other, PGA has events, and writers, every guild now has a lot of programs. We're all very mindful about mentoring and really helping. There's no official apprenticeship system in our business. We all have to sort of create it. And one of the things we talk a lot about at the Academy, and I've been involved with the PGA too, is creating pipelines. And the Academy has something called the Academy Gold Program, which helps gets internships for students. And if you dig, you will probably find a plethora of opportunities to find more people to put in your tribe and to get help from more experienced people. It is something we're so aware of. And when we were, again, diversifying membership, the first couple of years was very easy because there were a lot of people who were worthy, who obviously belonged. But then it got harder because the pipeline, the schools now are full of women and people of color. My classes are full of, it's hard to find a white guy in the class. But the difference between what happens at school and the real world is still a gap there. So we are really pushing the industry, the studios, the networks to be very mindful. There are diversity hires in writers' rooms, in television, et cetera, et cetera. So it's moving in the right direction, but it never seems fast enough.
I just want to clarify for anyone who's, we have attendees from all three campuses, New York, South Beach, and Los Angeles here today. But any of you based in New York, and Janet referenced Film Independent, it used to be the Independent Film, IFP, the Independent Feature Project, renamed itself here in New York and now called the Gotham. So.
Yeah. Right, Gotham for New York, the equivalent of Film
Which is a
Independent.
great networking opportunity, and they have a lot of really worthwhile programming that it's worth checking out. So I'm going to say thank you very much, Janet Yang.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you
It's
for
really
having me.
it's really a pleasure to see you, and I think we really, really appreciate your time. It's been quite illuminating and elucidating. And I hope everyone, if you haven't seen Over the Moon and you have your Netflix, check it out. And we certainly wish you all the best with your current and future projects.
And I wish all the students of NIFA all the best. And keep the dream alive, keep the flame going, but also be mindful of what's happening in the industry. Read the trades, figure out what's going on. Things are changing so fast. I've been doing a bunch of pitch meetings on TV projects, And almost every pitch meeting, the executive will say, we're revamping. We with the marching orders we're getting yesterday are different from today, which will be different from tomorrow. Things are changing so fast. So it's important to keep your ear to the ground and just keep up with the news and, stay connected with one another. And best of luck to all of you.
Thank you so much, Janet Yang.
Yeah.
We'll
Take care.
see you
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye-bye.